Hello, and thank you for joining us for our cocktails and conversations. My name is Stephanie Bedingfield, and I am the president of St. Germaine's Children's Charity. I hope this finds everyone healthy and well. This has been quite a year. Since the current restrictions due to COVID-19 has prevented us from gathering in large groups, I want to thank you for taking the time to listen either in the comfort of your own home or at the small individual gatherings we were able to host. I want to welcome all those who are new to our organization or may be interested in becoming a member. I would also like to take this time to thank everyone for your continued and valuable contributions to our organization. For 36 years, your generosity has allowed us to continue our mission to prevent the abuse and neglect of children and young adults and provide financial support to child abuse prevention agencies in San Diego. However, we currently find ourselves in a truly unprecedented time. As the year unfolds and restrictions from the pandemic remain in place, many of the children and young adults that we support are suffering more than ever. At-home mandates, increased isolation, and lack of supervision from teachers, coaches, and mentors has caused the level of abuse to escalate at alarming rates without the normal reporting. Unfortunately, needs have risen while charitable giving has fallen significantly. As a result, we are here today to continue our mission and provide the awareness that is needed. In our first virtual presentation, we will hear from Professor Jessica Heldman, another important advocate who works on behalf of foster children and those in the juvenile court system in San Diego. Here to speak with her are our newest board members and responsible for putting our evening together, our vice presidents of programs, Susie Piegza and Carrie Masai.
And thank you, Professor Heldman. If you'd like, we'll just start with some Q&A. And one of the things our members are very interested in is that the Child Advocacy Institute at the University of San Diego School of Law has been advocating on behalf of children, particularly abused and neglected children, for more than 30 years. Why does the Institute focus on this issue?
Thank you so much for having me. We're thrilled for the opportunity to share about the Children's Advocacy Institute and just so encouraged and heartened by the work that you're doing at St. Germaine on behalf of this population of children. The Children's Advocacy Institute at the University of San Diego School of Law is a public interest institute, and so we're always motivated to work on behalf of folks who don't have availability to the opportunity to advocate for themselves. And there's really no population that is more vulnerable and more powerless than children in general. They don't have the opportunity to vote. They don't have financial means to influence policy, and they don't have methods to have their voice heard by folks who make decisions about our society. So we advocate on behalf of children in general, but children who are abused, neglected, exploited, those are the most vulnerable of this vulnerable population. And we as a community are those who must look out for these children and ensure that they're protected and make sure their needs are met. In particular, children in the foster care system are under the jurisdiction of the juvenile court. And what that really means is the court and the public agencies are stepping in as parents. And that means that all of us as a community are responsible for making sure that these children are parented well. So that's really been the driving force behind our Children's Advocacy Institute. We use levers of the law to make a difference on behalf of these children. We advocate in front of the legislature. We advocate in courts to ensure that children's rights and children's interests are at the forefront in a community where they're so often forgotten. We try to ensure that the public understands these issues. We identify problems and we force discussion. One of the stories I like to tell that I think summarizes what we do really well is a story you may have heard before. I refer to it as the river story. The idea that somebody's walking by a rushing river and sees somebody in the river waving their hand, asking for help, and that person dives into the river, pulls that person to shore, and they've saved that person's life. But when they turn around and they see in the river that there's somebody else who needs help, they have to dive in again and pull that person to shore. And when they turn around again and they see that the river is full of people in crisis asking for help, you can still dive in the river and save each and every individual life, but you can also decide to go upriver and try to figure out, why are people falling into the river in the first place? What can we do to prevent this problem and this crisis before it even starts? And that's a lot of what we do at the Children's Advocacy Institute.
Well, thank you so much, Professor Heldman. It's an honor to be speaking with you today, and thank you to Susie and Stephanie as well. How significant a problem is child abuse and neglect in San Diego County?
Well, child abuse and neglect is a problem, countrywide. It's not simply San Diego County. We know that every 47 seconds in this country, a child is confirmed as abused or neglected. In San Diego specifically, we know that more than 3,700 children in 2018 were found to have been abused or neglected. In that same year, more than 1,100 children entered foster care for the first time here in San Diego. And in 2018, at any given time, there were about 2,300 children living outside of their homes as part of the foster care system here. The good news is that substantiated maltreatment is actually going down, and it has been for several years. But as those numbers indicate, it is still a really significant problem. And it's not just a significant problem because of the immediate abuse and neglect that children are experiencing, but the long-term concerns that we have for children who undergo this trauma and victimization. It affects their mental health. It affects their physical health. We know that adverse childhood experiences result in increased risks of serious issues such as heart disease or cancer. And that's nothing to say, that doesn't even address the issues that we have with continued abusive relationships, involvement in the juvenile and criminal justice system, all of which the risks are greater for children who have undergone significant trauma, and it has nothing to do with them. It's not their fault. They're simply victims of those circumstances.
Professor Heldman, what are some of the typical and persistent challenges children in the foster care system face?
So one of our consistent concerns for children in the child welfare system is a lack of stability. There's always a need for more foster homes for children if they have to be outside of their own homes. We particularly need homes for children who have special needs. Special needs can be anything from having a medically fragile child or a child with a disability to children who have suffered from sexual exploitation, or even large sibling sets who it's so important to them to be able to stay together rather than be separated among different foster homes. So we always have that need for more homes to be able to keep children stable. We see that children spend too long in foster care, which again contributes to that lack of stability. In San Diego, the median number of months that children spend in foster care is 17.5 months. Just think about that. Almost a year and a half of a child's life spent away from their family and likely without the stability of a permanent home. And we know that during a year of foster care, 36% of foster children in San Diego are going to experience 3 or more placements. In that first year of being in foster care, that's not something we would want for our own children. We're all struggling with the lack of stability these days, given the challenges we have. Just imagine being away from family and having to move every few months due to that lack of stability. So that's one issue that we're particularly concerned about that's consistent in foster care.
Thank you, Professor Heldman. What do most people not know about the foster care system, but they should know?
One of the things that we spend a lot of time at our institute educating the public about are issues related to what we call transition age youth. There's a lot of folks that imagine foster care, and what they have in their mind is the picture of a young child. And certainly that is an area of concern for us, but there's a significant number of children who end up in the foster care system and don't find themselves a permanent home and don't have the chance to reunify with their family. And so they reach the age of 18 or 21 without the kind of stable support that we all would love to give to our children, and most of us probably experienced with our own families as well. I know when I went off to college, I took it for granted that I could come home to my family on vacations, that I had help in finding jobs and paying rent. Insurance, health insurance was paid for me. These are the kinds of concerns that children who are aging out of foster care, as we call it, struggle with. And as a community, as a society, we don't always keep their needs at the forefront of our advocacy. And that's something that we really highlight in our work.
Professor Heldman, how has COVID-19 affected abused and neglected children?
Stephanie did a great job in her introduction, really highlighting the concerns that we had early on. When schools shut down, there was significant concern that abuse and neglect was going to continue, that it was going to likely get worse given the stressors that families were experiencing. And that we weren't going to have the eyes on kids that we typically do. Teachers are mandated reporters. That means by law, they have to report suspected abuse. So there was a great deal of concern, a great deal of effort to make the public aware of the fact that we all need to be vigilant about keeping our eye on vulnerable children. That really did occur in the first few months of COVID. We saw that there were a significant number of fewer cases that were called in to the child abuse hotline. So we were very concerned. In the last few months, there has been greater awareness. There has been a good job done by child welfare services to preemptively check on vulnerable families and families at risk. We have found that the calls to the hotline have come back to a normal level in the last few months. Another area of concern that we've had throughout COVID is we're always struggling to create normalcy for children who are in the foster care system. They've undergone such trauma, such crisis, and for them it's really important, for most of them, to stay in touch with their families, to have visits, to maintain those relationships with parents who, are loving but not necessarily able to care for them, and certainly visits with other family members and siblings. So that was a concern as well, that it would be difficult to maintain those relationships. And that's certainly been something that we've struggled to help advocate for, that resources and efforts are made to allow children to use technology like this and to have the precautions and the protective gear so that social workers can still get families together to help them work towards reunification and building their relationships together.
Thank you. And what role do foundations and nonprofit organizations play in preventing and responding to child maltreatment?
Well, community organizations and foundations and nonprofits are vital to preventing child abuse and neglect and to responding to it in a positive way. This issue is too big for any government system to handle on its own. Our child welfare agencies, our courts are often just pushed to the limit in being able to manage the cases that they do. The work is incredibly difficult, and we look to community organizations to help provide for the needs of families, ideally so that they can get the support they need before a child even has to leave their home. Poverty is such an intertwined part of the risk of child abuse and neglect. So organizations that can help families meet basic needs and provide services mental health services, substance abuse treatment can make a huge difference in preserving a family. And once, of course, children are outside of their home, placed outside of their home, it is imperative to have the partnership of our communities and organizations to care for those children, rally around those children, and as I said before, provide them with a sense of normalcy. The organizations that I've had contact with that have done amazing things for kids, providing them with services, but also just things like a trip to get their nails done or get their hair done or to go to a museum or the zoo. I just can't express enough how important that is for a child who's struggled through abuse and neglect to have a sense of what it's like to be a normal kid. That's something that every child deserves. So we're so grateful to organizations that make a difference in that way.
Can you tell us about some of the successes that the Children's Advocacy Institute has had on behalf of foster children?
Sure. We've been really excited for 30 years to sponsor hundreds and hundreds of bills in the legislature that have worked to protect children. In particular, in the last several years, we've sponsored a number of bills that focus on commercially sexually exploited children, which is really a horrific circumstance that happens far too often among the children in our child welfare system. One case that we brought that was really rewarding to us was a case that we brought here in California to argue on behalf of foster families who were not getting paid a sufficient amount to actually cover the costs of caring for the foster children in their home. And like I said before, we're always in need of more foster families. So it's very difficult for somebody to do that if having a child in their home is going to bankrupt them. So we advocated for increased funding to foster families so that they could actually, care for these children, meet their basic needs, and care for them like they would their own. And we succeeded in that case and have increased the payments to foster families in the last 10 years, which has made a huge difference to children and families across all of California. So we get really excited when we get to go in there and advocate and speak on behalf of this population.
What is your hope and vision for San Diego's foster children?
Well, there's a quote that I often like to share. It's from Robert F. Kennedy, and he said, "Justice, dignity, and equality, their meaning can be distilled into one goal, that every child in this country live as we would want our own children to live." And that's really my vision, and I think the vision all of you share for children who are abused and neglected and in foster care. These could be our children. And in fact, when they come into our child welfare system, they are our children. We are responsible as a community, as a society, and we need to prioritize these children. And we want them to be at the forefront of people's thinking. It's not just children today, but it's who these children are in the future that we're investing in. So that's really my vision, is that children, and in particular, these vulnerable and victimized children, become the number one priority for us here in San Diego.
All right. Thank you, Professor Heldman, so much for your time and efforts and everything you do for our children. As you expressed so eloquently, it is so hard on these kids, and especially right now during the pandemic. So we truly appreciate everything that you are doing. I know that many of you are familiar with our organization and are familiar with the fact that our main fundraiser is the Silver Tea. But in lieu of the pandemic and the restrictions that are in place, we also had to pivot how we're going to do our main fundraiser. So this year, I just wanted to end this on a positive note. We are so excited that we are going to be creating a beautiful community cookbook from the chefs and restaurants in La Jolla. And this cookbook is going to be our fundraiser that we're going to sell, and all the proceeds from this cookbook are going to be used to give all the agencies, the child abuse prevention agencies in San Diego, the much needed funds that they need this year to help our kids. I don't want to talk too much further about the cookbook. I just wanted to give a little teaser, but I wanted you all to know that we are still moving forward. We are still committed. We all are part of this great world to help our youth. And thank you all very, very much for your time.